It's okay. I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Um, Thanks for visiting the CCD info session for 2026. My name is Roshni Thakur. I use she and her pronouns. I'm the Director of Community Engagement and Culture at the Atlanta Regional Commission inside the Community Development Department. I'm here with my wonderful team, including our co-facilitator, Rostin Wu, um, zooming
Hello.
in from California. And then we have Max Coleman, our senior planner, Antamil Jorky, our community engagement and culture planner, and then Priscilla Torres, who you may have not met, but she's fairly new to our team, but our program assistant. Hi, Vanessa! It's nice to see your face. um, yeah, turn on your cameras if you want. um, Thanks for joining. So, yeah, we have community center design. I'm curious. I mean, the director of like community engagement, so I'm gonna engage y'all, right? So I'm curious, who has heard of CCD? Who knows about our team's work? You can do a thumbs up. Vanessa, yeah, Elena, nobody else, right? Okay, one. Okay, cool. Push those buttons. Great, great, great. So some of you, I think a lot of you, great. I'm glad you're here. And so this is my third year at ARC, and this is the third year of collaborating with Rostin um, on CCD. And I am curious if you just want to put it in the chat or just unmute. Why are you here? Like, what made you want to come here? What are you curious about? Yeah, just curious. Go for
I
it.
can go first if that's okay.
Yeah.
Everyone can hear me. Also, sorry, I'm on vacation with my family and people are walking in the
Oh,
background, so I'm trying to move. Um, I'm here because I feel like as a planner, we are failing, and I feel like we're failing to do meaningful engagement. And I think that there's so much to learn and so much to explore. And I think right now we're just in such a silo as planners, and that it's just a better way to do things than the traditional way of doing things. So I'm excited to um, apply and learn more.
awesome. Thanks for joining us on vacation. Yeah, I think that's an issue that I've been hearing in the planning field. And yeah, does anybody else want to share why you're here? What made you want to come?
Um, Hi there. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. So sorry, I can't have my camera on. I'm also on vacation at the moment, but uh, my name is Ben, and I'm actually new to the Atlanta area. So I've been a planner for 5 years, and I agree with the earlier sentiment about just having to be better about meeting our community and everything. But I also thought this was a great opportunity to get more familiar with the Atlanta region now that I'm working in this part of town.
Cool. Where do you come from, Stephen?
Uh, Florida originally, but I spent the early part of my career in Michigan. So been bouncing around a bit, but excited to be
Nice. And thank you for joining us from vacation. Y'all are very dedicated people in the Atlanta region, so thank you. Lillian, I see your hand. Oh, we can't hear you though. No.
Hmm? No, can't hear you still.
Yeah, I don't know what the,
You can type
but
it.
if you want to type it, that'd be cool. Um, Sweet. Well, yes, you can type it in the chat. Thank you all for sharing. Yeah, we can do planning better. We can do engagement better. we can always grow, right? So I'm going to show for the session today, what we're going to do is I'm just going to explain a little bit of like where we are with CCD this year. We have made some pretty cool changes, and so I just want to make sure that everybody understands that, what the changes are and like what the benefits are and what this class entails. You're going to hear from Rostin formally on his work. If you don't know his work, pretty amazing artist, designer, educator, has worked in a lot of different cities. And so you get a little peek of his practice in this info session. And yeah, then we'll have questions. But always, if you have questions before then, please just unmute, raise your hand, put it in the chat. Max is watching the chat. If you have tech issues, Priscilla is our tech person. And I think that's pretty much it. Y'all ready? Great. I really can't believe y'all are here on your vacation. That is so awesome. Okay, let me try to share my screen. Can you see this okay?
I can see it.
Cool. Sweet. So this is our info session. And similar to what Stephen and Elena were talking about, this class is to improve engagement with under-resourced communities. We have a bunch of them in our Atlanta region, right? And our methodology is by working with artists, creatives, and culture bearers to reimagine traditional community planning and engagement processes. And what Ross and I and like the team really try hard at is to create a space that reimagines it with the community specifically because there's been a lot of harm, as y'all know, in planning with specific communities and generations. And so it's a lot of trust building. It's a lot of meeting people where they're at and also just like listening. So that is the approach that we take. And this is what's happening for 2026. Um, yeah, so that's me and Rustin, and we are artists that have done this kind of work in multiple cities. I'm a socially engaged artist. I really believe in the value of experiential learning, and I've taught at Portland State and at Georgia State. And my art practice itself just aligns with this kind of work and engaging with different populations to build community power and ownership. Um, and then Rostin, as I said before, incredible artist, designer, educator, and you'll learn more about his work in a little bit. And so we've been evolving this class, and that's primarily because we try to keep up a good feedback loop throughout the class and even afterwards. And we're always trying to think and evolve and grow because, you know, community work isn't static, it's very dynamic. And with that, essentially, though, we do keep these core things where we have small collaborations. Collaboration is so hard. I'm sure all of you know this, but it can be really challenging. So we wanted to create a creative experimental space to collaborate with also different kinds of people and backgrounds and sectors. Working on issues connected to planning, obviously, and then anchored in using art to advance community issues and not just art itself and creativity, but also working directly with artists on these things. So this is what CCD looks like this year. I lost my chat, but maybe I'm hoping a PDF of this can pop into your chat. We're also going to put it on our website too, so that you can download it. But basically, we have 3 phases for CCD. A few big changes, overarching changes, are that it's all in person. The last couple of years has been hybrid, but this year it's going to be all in person. We want it to be kind of like a conference, symposium kind of style, especially just like knowing that when you're going to those kinds of environments, you're very present with the people there, you learn from people there, you're sharing space together and working together in real time. So we wanted to create that. So it's 3 sessions between August and October. Um, and the first phase is what's possible. We're always trying to think of like what other people in our field are doing. We'll have guest speakers. We will have time for the cohort to learn about each other and learn about innovative community engagement across the, not only just the region, but I'm thinking around like the Southeast too. And so that is one aspect of it in the first day. It's 2 days. And so the second day, we're going to actually just get in there and start ideating and prototyping with our community partners that are 4 community organizations from the Metro Atlanta region. And I'll go into who they are in a little bit, but basically all of these partners have worked with ARC before. So we have the Austell Local Food Task Force, we have Build a Better Blacksville, we have the Connect, and we have South River Watershed Alliance. And so this first phase in those 2 days is going to be like an intro and then just like quick prototyping, ideation, things like that. And then after that, one big thing is that because of limited time, resources, things like that, we are only going to move forward with one community partner. And so the class will decide which community partner to move forward with in between August and September. And then that's when we'll start the co-design process in phase 2. Those dates are September 9th through 11th. I didn't mention this, but they're pretty much like all day sessions. It's just like we'll have a light breakfast and there's like food and we'll just like a conference or a symposium, we'll just stay together and work these sessions out. But in co-design, we'll have 3 days to do research. We're going to do a site visit, continue with small group work, ideate, prototype, and work directly with that community partner on that community issue. So that at the end of the second phase, the class will have a finalized plan for the project or projects to fully execute in October. And so that brings me to phase 3, which is the public engagement. We've done a lot of like learning, planning, ideating, prototyping, and now we have to like put it out into the world, right? And see what happens. Those dates in October are determined by the community partners. We are gathering dates from them. There's only 2 of them that have like something already going on. The other 2 do not. And so there's flexibility in dates, but we're going to get that by August. But basically, it's a whole day of executing the public engagement project. And then the subsequent day, the next day, is going to be reflection and seeing what next steps would be for the projects, but also like what are next steps for the people in the class and how they're going to apply this in their work. So those are the big ideas around the CCD for this year. Do y'all have any questions so far?
Yeah. Hey, it's not really a question, I guess just something for y'all to think about. Since this sounds like one of the goals is to have more traditional planners be a part of the sessions. Typically in the fall, there's a lot of engagement for all of our projects. So if, the earlier the date can be decided, I think the better. There might be a lot of folks with conflicts if it's not
For sure.
focused.
And you're talking
Just like,
specifically about the October date,
Yeah, just
Vanessa?
the October date, just because that's like a huge, it's the only time of year where it's really nice outside. So every client
Right.
wants their engagement to be in that month.
Yeah, totally.
That's really
And we are
helpful.
working
Thank
on,
you.
go ahead, Rostin.
Oh, I was just saying that's really helpful feedback. That's all.
Yeah,
I have a
cool. Anything
question.
else? Elena, I see that you unmuted.
Yes, just a question for how do you choose as a group for the selected community partner, or is there like a process in which, or is the process decided upon by those in the course?
Yeah, do you want to talk about that, Rostin?
Sure. I mean, I think there's sort of a certain amount of openness, I guess, of seeing what happens and a kind of faith that like it'll be clear that like one of these things seems the most exciting or the most feasible to us. So I think that, we don't really have like a voting process. We're not trying to make it feel too much like a competition kind of at the end of it. Sort
Yeah.
of like, well, we do things and like we see, hopefully everyone leaves with something that's really useful already. And then we'll kind of confer as a class, and I'm sure that Roshi and I will have, you know, probably some thoughts of like this seems like the most feasible or the most like kind of promising for like a project that we could all sink our teeth into, and we'll just sort of figure out which one we want to do together. But there's not like a specific process we've designed in advance of how to pick that.
Okay, that's really helpful. Yeah, I'm just thinking to myself, these are all incredible organizations. It'd be so wonderful to work with any of them. So, I was just curious. So I appreciate
Yeah, and we've
your
tried to
answer and
structure it really
thoughtfulness.
clearly with them so that they don't have a sense of feeling like they need to like
Right.
compete for what
Okay.
and I think
Yeah,
it'll be
no,
on
no,
both
that's
both
helpful.
ends, if a really interesting idea appears, and I think it is conceivable that if there's like two really interesting ideas that both seem super feasible that we figure
Hmm.
out a way to do the both. I think we're really sort of like open to see what happens, but we want to make sure at least one, we're going to
Hmm.
make a larger project out of it.
Amazing. Thank you.
And before Megan, I just wanted to note, like in this class specifically, we do, there's a lot of structure, but I'm glad you said that, Rustin, because we do have this like space of openness. And so like in two of our cohorts, like things changed with our community partner, which in reality that happens all the time. And like, what do you do around that? And so we're also trying to build skills of like not knowing and just kind of like um, prepping as much as you can, but also like where's the energy that we can follow, what makes sense, what are people engaged with, and like following those kinds of directions. Megan, I see your hand.
Thank you. Yes, I just had a question sort of related to Vanessa's point of likelihood of conflicts around that time of year. I know with ARC's requirement to participate for firms to participate in this process for the LCI program, if there might be consideration for flexibility to like send a coworker for one session or something, like if there is a particular conflict on one of the dates that gets selected.
Yeah, and that's a good question. And there can be flexibility. I think what I the best thing to do is in your application, there's a spot for notes or concerns or anything, and
Mhm.
just to raise that, that would just be helpful for us.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. So let's go in and about these community partners. I know that y'all know a lot of y'all might know a lot of them, but the Austell Local Food Task Force came out of the 2024 Austell City Agriculture Plan. And they serve the city of Austell and the neighboring communities, Powder Springs, and Mableton. And that they provide garden plots for members at no cost, and they're focused on promoting sustainability, working with communities at their local schools and their senior citizens. Um, and they're supported by Full Food Well Alliance. And so that's one. The next one is Build a Better Blacksville, and they just finished up a CDAP with us um, that started last year. They just finished it this year. And it's Blacksville is a historically Black, unincorporated community located within McDonough, Georgia, and Henry County, and it's experiencing rapid growth with new residential developments, while also undergoing a historic preservation and planning initiative to preserve its Reconstruction era roots, including former mill houses. And so Build a Better Blacksville is a CBO working to improve the quality of life for Blacksville's residents through impactful programs and community engagement. They're located in McDonough, Henry County, and then we have the Connect, who was a community partner for CCD in 2024, and they're located in Westview, and it's a hyper-local community think tank of residents, legacy Black businesses, creatives, micro startups, and solopreneurs, where global ideas are not only explored in theory, but developed and invested into by the very community in which they live. And the last community partner we have is the South River Watershed Alliance. They worked with us on a CDAP in 2023, and it's a river and community-focused environmental justice organization serving communities along the river's entire 60-mile length. They worked with ARC CDAP program to develop plans expanding recreational access to communities in the river's urban headwaters, and the city of Atlanta and South DeKalb County are the main geographies through the South River in the City initiative. So those are our partners, and the structure of the class includes community engaged artists. And so we have 4 of them that have taken CCD, that have done work in the public realms in the Metro Atlanta region. And they're Jasmine Carter, Simone Gaskin, Charity Hamadullah, Aisha Pennerman. Charity and Aisha took, I see some hand clapping. Great. Yeah, they're great. And so Charity and Aisha took CCD in 2024. They're both artists, muralists, and designers. Simone and Jasmine took CCD last year, and they are artists and educators, and they work in painting, film, and storytelling. And so the idea is that we have the co-facilitators and the ARC team, and then we have these artist leads working in these small collaborations with the other members of the class. We have found that the class size is better when it's smaller. So we're trying to keep the class around 20 people so that we can have like an even number of groups to support the community partners, and that they're led by these community engaged artists. And then some goals for this class, they're to help embed creativity into community engagement, to bring people who don't participate in planning processes to the table. It's done via collaborating with artists and community partners. And as this is an experiential class, we want this to benefit your practice after you take the class. We really want to figure out like how you will apply it to your work. So some benefits of taking this class: you'll learn best practices on community engagement through access to a network of local and national experts, practitioners, and other socially engaged creatives. You'll improve your ability to engage diverse stakeholders that haven't been involved in your planning processes through an immersive learning experience. You get to access the CCD alumni network, and you get to learn and share successes and challenges in implementing creative community engagement and local planning. And then you'll improve your ability to access ARC grants and technical assistance that require creative community engagement. Obviously, the LCIs, CDAPs, local food system plans that ARC offers. So those are the benefits.
Can I
Expectations.
just add a little bit on there?
Sure.
Just that,
Sorry.
I mean, I think one of the things that is very true of this group is that it's a really great set of people that come through this program. And so like accessing the alumni network sounds sort of like kind of formal, but but it really does feel like there's kind of like a really kind of sweet cohort of people who have a really similar orientation, who can draw on each other and find interesting ways to collaborate. And we've found in the past that people found interesting ways to collaborate even before the class was done. Just being like, oh, like you're working on this in this neighborhood, I'm also working in that neighborhood in this different way, and now we have these different connections, and we both want to do something special and interesting here. And so I think that is a really powerful piece of the equation. And it, I think there's both kind of formal alumni events, but there really is kind of a feeling of kind of a cohort, um, and many years of those cohorts that are there to support each other. That's all.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for making it more human. And we also have a reunion every year. We just had it in May, for all of the cohorts to come together, and connect. And we also produce a publication for each cohort too. So just the expectations. We are hoping, for people to be able to attend all of the sessions, because the CBO collaboration is really important. This is a space for you to be creative and experimental, and it's a space where you're actually going to do a public project. It's not just like theory. We're actually going to do it in real life. Yeah. And then just some other expectations that it is 7 in-person classes, August through October, and there is a fee of $650. In the past 2 years, it's been $1,500, so we've been able to bring it down, because we know that governments are getting their budgets slashed, and we want this to be as accessible as we can while covering the program costs. We have these quotes from local planners. If you don't know Carlos Garcia, he's working in the City of Atlanta's Department of City Planning. He took it last year, and he's trying to incorporate art components in all of his events. Started with a vintage typewriter, writing messages, love letters, or poems to the City of Atlanta. And then Maddie McGee, in Gwinnett County, she actually is joining the Georgia Tech Masters of City and Regional Planning program this fall, but she became more involved in her community, and she's now the active member of Midtown Infrastructure Committee, is supporting our community forums work at ARC, and she joined the board of local nonprofit Ground Up Collective. So a lot of great work that's happening after the class. So the application is due on Monday. And we have 16 spots available, and we have a selection committee that is going to rate the applications next week, and we hope to announce the class the following week. So I think that's what I have. I think I went over a little time. So yeah, I wasn't able to see the chat, so I'll answer those questions, but I do want to hand it off to Rostin, so that he can share his work. How's that sound, everybody?
Do people have any like burning questions before we get to the next bit? All right, cool. I'm gonna show some stuff. I guess I'll share my screen. So my name is Rostin Wu. I am somewhere between kind of an artist and a planner and a kind of community organizer type person, and a designer, I guess. I'm based in Los Angeles now. I lived in New York City for about a decade and ran an organization there called the Center for Urban Pedagogy. Roshni and I met through her grad program in Portland, and we've been in touch for a long time. And then when she was working at Atlanta, she invited me to kind of come out and connect with ARC, and I just really loved working with this set of folks. I've taught, art and design in a lot of different kinds of contexts, and I just find this to be a really special kind of group of people, working with people who are, in their careers already, both as artists or as planners or as community, development people. They just kind of come to it with a different kind of energy and a different kind of commitment and different, already a lot of life experiences. And the group that does this course is truly diverse in a lot of really key ways, both race and ethnicity, but also age and gender and kinds of engagement. And so it just kind of makes a really fruitful, interesting classroom where I think people have a lot to share with one another. And so I just found it to be invigorating way to connect, and I really like this model of kind of learning by doing. So I've just really loved working with the program, so I did it a second time, and now here I am a third time. So I'm just going to show a little bit of stuff that I do in my life when I'm not doing ARC, which is like most of the time. And so yeah, so I'm an artist who works in a way that's not particularly disciplinary, in the sense that, sometimes I make things that are kind of permanent outdoor sculptures. I'll make things that are audio pieces, temporary events. I'll do data visualizations. I'll make, all kinds of printed materials and design things in collaboration with community organizations. I really sort of adapt the projects to kind of meet the situation, meet the moment. So while a lot of the stuff kind of looks the same because I was involved in it all, like a lot of times the kind of form of it, can really vary. So I'm just going to show maybe, I don't know, four projects, four to five-ish projects, to give you a sense of kind of what I do, and hopefully a kind of sense of how these kinds of approaches might be applicable or meaningful in your work. So this is the first project.
Rostin,
Yeah.
weird. I'm not seeing your screen. Are other people seeing your screen?
Oh,
We saw it for a second and then it disappeared.
interesting. What are you seeing?
It's just the regular
Just the regular screen.
Zoom.
Okay, let me share this again. Maybe I'll share just my straight desktop now, and we can. Are people seeing a screen now?
I see something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. How long ago did you not start not seeing images? Well, whatever. You missed some cool looking things. So these are, I'll just like backtrack a little bit. So data visualization, like audio pieces, installations outdoors. People are seeing my screen now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is kind of an old project I did with CUP, the Center for Urban Pedagogy, when I was living in New York City. Right, what you're looking at right now is kind of a list of vending restrictions in the borough of Manhattan. So you can sort of see like this is sort of a little part of the administrative code, governing sort of street traffic. And it's about food vendors being prohibited from vending on the following streets at the following days and times. You can sort of see like even if you had a law degree and a lot of time on your hands and were a native English speaker, you'd have a hard time figuring out like what the rules and regulations for your profession really were. And so CUP, working with an organization called the Street Vendor Project, we collaborated to take that and basically turn it into this, which is sort of like a graphic interpretation of all those guidelines and rules, that gives street vendors a sense of where they are allowed to be, and changes the dynamic of street vending in New York City, where a lot of times street vendors feel very beholden to kind of capricious enforcement of laws, people telling them that they have to move. A lot of times bricks and mortar stores don't really like street vendors being on the street, even when it's perfectly legal, and they tell them that they can't be there. So this was meant to be sort of a tool that they could use, in their field, in the work, to kind of negotiate and say like, actually, I know that I'm within my rights. I know where my stuff is. I know how big my table can be. So it's both kind of an education for street vendors, but also a tool for negotiation with police or law enforcement or store owners. So we built this as kind of fold out, and when it folds out to a pamphlet that talks about sort of the history of street vending in New York City, and also gives like ideas of how how that system could and should be reformed. We printed these in an edition of about 10,000, distributed them on the streets of New York with the Street Vendor Project, and then the following year, the Department of Consumer Affairs in New York City decided that they actually found a lot of value in that, and they started printing it themselves. So we did another run of 10,000 and another run, and it was then something that was given out to vendors when they were applying for their vendor medallions. So, so that's an example of like a simple design project, in the sense of sort of just trying to clarify the existing laws, but in a way that hopefully kind of reduces the asymmetry of power for folks. And that's very typical of the kind of work I was doing at the Center for Urban Pedagogy, which still exists today. If you pop over to that website, you can check out a lot of similar kinds of projects. This became a publication series. We would do 4 of these a year and still continue to this day. So now there's like, I think literally close to 100 of them, all sorts of different topics and organizations, where we essentially pair a designer with people who are doing organizing or public education in some way, and try to create like a well-designed kind of beautiful resource about all kinds of things, how to get welfare in New York City, how to kind of organize against fracking, what's going on with bilingual education in schools or domestic workers' rights, all sorts of issues like that. So check out Making Policy Public. That's an example of the kind of project I love to do. Kind of similar set of projects I did at CUP are this things we started to call Envisioning Development Toolkit. Um, when I was going to a lot of community board meetings, I would just find so many of them would get kind of like bogged down into this like very weird debate at that time. This is in like maybe I mean, it's still going on now, but this is in the like like 2010s, where people would basically argue about what is affordable housing, even before you get to the question of like whether you wanted it or not. Some people would say like, oh, this housing isn't actually going to be affordable, and other people would say like, you're going to bring a bunch of homeless drug addicts into my neighborhood, and there's a lot of people were sort of arguing about these sort of chimeras of like what they thought affordable housing might be. And we thought if we made a tool that could just clarify exactly what was meant in some way, maybe that could really change the dynamic of some of these meetings where people are trying to explain a project or explain a new zoning regulation. So we made a booklet, like a guide that sort of breaks down things that are, you think what affordable housing means, but to give it, here's a technical definition for it. Here's what it means, in this federal thing. Here's what, area median income is. Here's how you can sort of think about like what is being actually said when people say that this housing is going to be affordable. And then we built this kind of big giant felt chart and a website that helped people kind of like graph out sort of like the demographics of their neighborhood based on the federal median income or area median income and federal income guidelines for affordable housing, and then allow people to sort of really talk about what the housing is. I won't go into it in more detail than that, but basically a simple data visualization project that I think really opens up what sometimes can seem like a totally esoteric topic, even though it's something so human and basic for so many people. I also do a lot of projects that are about sort of changing the way that people think about a place. This is a little diagram of I got from an organization called the Center for Land Use Interpretation. But basically, you think about, there's a landscape and there's an observer, and then, what you kind of understand about that place kind of happens in this interpretive layer. And, while things like national parks, have maybe a lot of interpretive signs and guidelines to help people kind of read a landscape, when we walk around our cities, a lot of us are kind of projecting, a lot of, internal biases or ideas of like what we're looking at and what it means. Is this a good neighborhood or a bad neighborhood? And so I think of a lot of the projects I do as sort of intervening in that interpretive layer. I did this project in a neighborhood called Willowbrook. This is now like maybe like 7 years ago, where there was a bunch of investment about to happen. It's a neighborhood that's right between Watts and Compton. And there's a lot of people I think had an idea of what that neighborhood was without ever having actually been there. And so I was originally asked to kind of create basically visioning tools by the planning department. That was the initial kind of like creative visioning tools. That was the initial thing I was asked to do. When I got to the neighborhood and tried to start meeting with people in the community, it became clear that folks had actually just done a visioning exercise like a year ago, and that they didn't actually have a lot of appetite for more visioning, and felt like they'd been kind of like just jerked around by planners for a long time. And in fact, there was a pretty long history of going back to the 70s, after the Watts Uprising, Watts Rebellion, people doing kind of these kind of half-assed planning projects in the neighborhood and sort of being like, oh, we're going to change everything and like fix your neighborhood, without really spending a lot of time to maybe understand what was going on there. And so what I got there was just like a ton of what I might call planning fatigue. People did not really want to engage in planning projects. So I had to really think about like, well, what can I do with this project that I've been asked to perform for the county? And so what we ended up kind of coming up with was, instead of trying to make a vision of what the neighborhood could be or should be, is there a way to kind of make it more clear to the county what the neighborhood actually is? So we ended up kind of creating what I called like a home, garden, and vehicle tour. And people would, it was both like kind of a weekend festival where people would show off their homes and gardens, because one of the things that's unique about this area of South LA is there's these really, really deep lots, very like double the depth of a lot of lots in the city. And so what you see from the street, if you're doing like drive-by urbanism, just like making a guess of what's happening in the neighborhood, is really different than if you actually kind of get invited into someone's home and see what's going on in the backyard. So we tried to just kind of celebrate that. So this is couple, Sandy and Harry. He had an exotic tortoise collection. She had an exotic cactus collection. So they met and they got married and they sort of built this kind of paradise of turtles and cacti in their backyard. This is a fountain that was constructed by a retired butcher who, from the rubble from the construction of the 105 freeway, he's like a self-taught stonemason. There's this marching band that tours internationally. It's like used to be led by John Williams as arranger and Barry White's arranger. Here's a dog training club that's run by two retired truck drivers who'd set up this kind of huge kind of dog run in a vacant city lot. This is Charles Dixon, who's an incredible sculptor and has the world's largest collection of super soakers. Super soakers were invented by a black aerospace engineer from a neighboring city. So it has kind of like local history lore to it. This woman has a model train yard in her backyard. She's a nurse, but in her spare time, she's building this kind of like model train world. So all these sorts of stories kind of came out by going into people's backyards and talking to them about their neighborhood. So we basically turned that into a publication, and then gave that both gave it out to the people who participated, sold it as a fundraiser at the library, and then the county started to give that book out. It's called Willowbrook Is. The whole thing is in English and Spanish. Part of it also was sort of trying to do some kind of repair between certain aspects of the community that were divided. I can tell you more later. I'm going very fast through these. But essentially the idea was, can we make this, what's actually happening in this neighborhood and the kind of the richness and the texture of it more available and visible to the people who are asked to do planning there. So this was also given out as sort of like a briefing manual for people who were asked, from the county and Metro who are doing work in the neighborhood. And the county supervisor really loved it and then commissioned, 5 more of these from different artists to do in different neighborhoods. And it's become sort of like a series in South LA to kind of, document and tell the stories of these neighborhoods in a way that hopefully changes the way that people do planning work. Here's a related project. I think this is the last one I'll show, or second to last, called Takachizu that I did in Little Tokyo, which is one of the kind of last remaining Japan towns on the West Coast. And kind of like, even though there's a lot of development there and there are not that many Japanese American people living in this neighborhood, it's still kind of a spiritual and cultural home for a pretty wide diaspora of people. So they were doing a planning process to do cultural preservation. They asked me to help them kind of figure out how to do visioning for that. And so we created this exhibit called Takachizu that was essentially, when it opened, it had nothing in it. And we held these, and Takachizu is like a neologism of like Takara, which is like treasure, and Chizu is map, so treasure map. We asked people to come bring in what they thought were the cultural treasures of the neighborhood, and then we would photograph them with this light table, hold these sort of storytelling sessions and record them, and then we'd sort of build the exhibit in real time. So every time we did one of these events or parties, we'd take them around to retirement homes and churches and temples. We would kind of add more stuff to this exhibit and kind of fill it up over the course of 3 months with more and more treasures. And then people could kind of comment on things or add a tag if they thought like, oh, this one's really important to me as well. And this became sort of the basis of a whole kind of cultural planning, cultural plan for the neighborhood. Kind of
can I just name something that's really important with this? Is I don't think you have an image of this, but Roston and his team created this project and it was empty. So it was like an institution that is saying, hey, welcome to our first day of the thing. But the fact that it's empty gave a signal that actually the community gets to fill it up. And I think that's the thing that is very rare when working with communities, is that actually we're giving you space to contribute and develop this in the resources to develop this too.
Yeah, and that's a really important piece of it, right? Is that in a way there was a sense that we didn't want to exert any kind of curatorial authority over like here's what the treasures of the neighborhood are. And there wasn't any sort of vetting process, like anything that anybody wanted to bring in and photograph, we would put up there, and if people got excited about it, that would sort of become apparent. And sometimes people would bring like, here's my t-shirt from the fun run I did in like 1988, and you'd be like, great, like we'll put it up, and maybe there's an interesting story there. But you kind of just get a really wide-ranging sense of like what's going on in the neighborhood from what people bring in, and it could be all kinds of stuff. But one of the things that kind of was animating this, or that kind of came out of it, or whatever, that it, a lot of times it's hard to say like which thing came first, but something that it connected with was this organizing struggle around First Street North, which was a little area of Little Tokyo that had been raised by urban renewal. But before that, it had been, a thriving part of Little Tokyo. But, after incarceration and relocation in World War II, it was essentially emptied out. And then the city said, oh, this is a slum, it's condemned. And then they raised it to the ground, and it was a municipal parking lot. And Little Tokyo really wanted to reclaim it and say, like, this actually is a really important part of our neighborhood. And we have sort of what they called sort of like moral site control. Like they wanted to make the case that like the city sort of owed this lot back to Little Tokyo. And so we were able to kind of, through the Takachizu process, kind of gather a bunch of treasures that had to do with First Street North and put them together into a zine. And that was used as part of like kind of the storytelling and organizing around getting the city to give Little Tokyo Service Center like the right of first refusal in the development of that lot, and it worked. We did do that. So this also exists as a website that you can check out at takachizu.org. It's also a permanent installation at the Oakland Museum of California Art that sort of talks about different mapping projects. Yes, I'll go really quickly through this one because I think I'm kind of out of time, right?
It's
So I've
okay.
also worked in adjacent neighborhood, Skid Row. I've worked in that neighborhood for more than a decade, and we made a community plan many years ago. It was one of those things where we made the plan. It was like from the perspective of unhoused people and people living in SROs who are not normally consulted about like what they want to see through the city's like traditional standing planning process, or at least they're not privileged in that at all. And there's a lot of other kind of development, big names in development that wanted to basically get rid of Skid Row. This is at a time when there was like a real boom in downtown LA that is now past, but when there is a lot of plans to kind of build your high towers throughout Skid Row. We made this community plan. The city was like, great, thanks. It didn't seem like they cared in particular that we made it. And then so through that process, I also hooked up with this theater troupe that's down in Skid Row called the Los Angeles Poverty Department that's been there since the 80s, doing community theater, but it also has this kind of really amazing, I don't know, just a really amazing vision, and they've been able to kind of tour internationally. And a lot of their work, they write the plays through a group process, and they're often kind of like ripped from the headlines. So after we did this first community plan, they were like, what if we, tried to get the city's attention a little bit more? And they're like, we want to make this play that's about sort of like the secret backroom deals that happen. And so we'll kind of make this fantasy about how like, the city, city council members are having golf with developers in this golf course, and like the real conversations they're having. And they called it the Back Nine, and they asked me to build the set for it. And so I built this mini golf course that you could play, and each hole sort of told a different story about sort of the history of zoning and planning in Skid Row, and sort of like why Skid Row is the way it is. It's a super long story I won't get into, but you sort of just get the idea of like the form of having these different kinds of holes tell different stories about planning. It also was the set for this play that kind of imagined these sort of backroom deals. As it turns out, like 3 of those city council members are now in jail, and like all those things that were kind of like fantasized about is like there actually was just straight up corruption, like actionable legal corruption that was going on. And so it turned out to be even more true than we thought. But also through this process, we were trying to kind of get the ear of city planning and talk about the importance of Skid Row and why these things in the community plan were important to kind of include. And we were able to do that. Like there was things, the city had never kind of created a 100% affordable housing zone. When we started out, that was like one of the fantasies of that task force. We were told that it was like literally impossible and illegal. And by the time this play, and exhibit was done, we had a lot of articles in the Guardian, the Los Angeles Times, and lo and behold, we were able to get, this zoning designation. That we were told that was legally impossible by at the beginning of that process. So there's just an example of sort of the way that culture can sometimes kind of reach around and do things that you can't really do through like the formal channels, even when you're trying to like, we have a community plan, we have, whatever, 1,000 people who are willing to come to your hearing. Sometimes just other kinds of pressure can move things forward in a way that you can't anticipate. Um, Last one, super quick, just to kind of talk about environmental stuff. I also do a lot of work that deals with ecology. I'm working on a permanent installation with the Nature Conservancy about wetlands alongside the LA River. But in preparation for that, this is an example of the wetlands that's being designed. We wanted to sort of help people sort of think about the river itself. So I built this 30-minute kind of guided meditation that sort of talks about the LA River, which is a super complicated waterway in Los Angeles that is kind of somewhere between a natural river and like a drainage sewer. It's at this point totally channelized, and it kind of brings together all these different watersheds. So I wanted to kind of bring people to the river and have them really spend time there and sit at the banks of it. And so I made this kind of audio piece that's like a half hour long. And in a lot of ways, the river itself does the heavy lifting of kind of creating this really interesting thing for you to observe, but I wanted to just find a way to get people to like sit right down at the banks of it and really just stop and pause. So there's this 30-minute narration that takes people kind of on this journey through like these different ways of thinking about the watershed, and but also kind of brings people to the river. So that's something we installed last year, and it's now sort of a semi-annual kind of event that we do at the river. To bring people to the edge and have this kind of like way of thinking about it. And it's also kind of like in a sense, a kind of advertisement for this new park that's happening across the river from, you're looking across the river at the site of this watershed and, or sorry, not watershed, but wetlands. It's being kind of like man-made wetlands that's being developed across the river. Okay, I'm gonna stop there, but that hopefully gives you like just, I don't know, I just kind of wanted to like basically open up my drawers and like throw out a bunch of stuff. You get a sense of the kinds of things that I'm excited about, and maybe see some way that some of this stuff could be applicable to like the projects that you're working on. What I'm really excited about doing with you all, with ARC, is really seeing something emerge that's probably really different than any of these things. Something that's that has everything to do with the local context, and what's going on there. That's how I work, and what I'm interested in is sort of like getting into a situation and then getting out of it, like basically figuring out like what's going on here and how can we add something really interesting or meaningful to this equation. And that's always different, and that's sort of what's fun about this project, or this whatever we call it class, is getting to get into a situation together. All right, that's a little bit
amazing. Nice job. So yeah, I hope y'all get a little bit of a flavor of where we're starting from for this class and like what arts and culture could actually do for planning. If it's not done usually like overnight, you'll see things that happen that carry the actions over time, like people going to jail for corruption. I love that. So, really great work. Thank you, Rustin. I know that we only have a few more minutes left. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. I did see a couple of questions in the chat. Give us your questions. I think one was about the project that was last year. There is a catalog Max put in the chat that of what we did. It was a third space at a family farm, Black-owned family farm, Atlanta Harvest, that had a mural component on it, and they use it. The need was around there was no shade, there was no places to gather, and how could the farm itself be a third space for the community in Clayton County? And I think Vanessa, you had a question about goals?
Yeah, I guess just generally as I'm not thinking as much about the course itself, but like how the stuff that you were showing, Rostam, which was super awesome. I love Cup. Like how that can translate into a typical planning project structure for a consulting firm, and just wondering like, um, how were you like compensated? Who paid for it? Were you a part of a typical planning process for any of these, or was it more through like, the governmental body that you worked with? Just if you could talk about some of that logistics or operations.
Yeah, so every project, I mean, obviously every project is pretty different. Um, but yeah, I definitely do work with municipalities and regional governments like directly as a consultant. Like sometimes
Hmm.
people will just be like, "Oh, we're doing this thing called the housing element update and no one understands what it is and we need people to understand it. So could you kind of come up with like an interesting outreach strategy and like materials to help people kind of like get on board with what this thing is, you know?" So that certainly happens. In the case of like the Willowwood project, that was a direct contract with the county, but it ended up being something, and I think I'm not necessarily, how do I say this? Like that was a direct contract with the county that there were several points in there where I was like, I would like to stop doing this project. Like I will release myself from this contract. I don't think we can do what you'd asked me to do. And they were like, okay, let's rewrite the contract then to make it like what actually should happen. And so we had to like go back and rewrite the contract several times
Hmm.
throughout that process to kind of make it what it needed to be that would actually be something that I wouldn't be like embarrassed to have done, if that if that makes sense. So sometimes that happens, so I think there are these kind of, like, sometimes, I guess, and part of what I do hope that like some of these projects, will help consultants figure out is sort of like how to like kind of like shift the terms of, sometimes you're asked to do something where you're like, I don't know, like that's not the most useful thing. Can we like work together to kind of like shift that, in some way? So anyway, that there are times when a contract something starts out as one contract and then changes. There are other times that I'm just hired straight up as an artist doing a community, like a public art project, and there are lots of times when I'm hired by like people who are doing organizing who want me to kind of like make, that community plan was like, as a client for Skid Row Housing Trust, so as a nonprofit, they wanted to like create a community plan and they hired us, so there's lots of different ways that it can work. There are times also when I'm trying to think of like an example of this, like when they're like all the Takachizu stuff was done for Little Tokyo Service Center, which is like a housing developer in Little Tokyo. But they had a federal grant to do planning work, and so that was like kind of like the beginning of that planning work process. So yeah, I don't know. There's like so many different paths. Does that help at all?
Yeah, I guess none of that really fits in with like the way that the LCI is set up, but that's maybe a conversation for another time. I'm just
Mhm.
curious as to how we can, weave that
I
in a
think
bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing with the LCI stuff is just that, um, planning process has its own process, right? And this is what tried to touch on in the year that you were in, Vanessa, but that you have to start from a different place. So maybe like, are the questions different? Are the curiosities different? Are the people who are actually that you're even starting with, are they the usual players? Are you actually like,
Hmm.
getting other people involved? And so we're hoping that one of the goals is to have like more diverse stakeholders, and specifically from communities who've been harmed. And so we're having people take this class to learn those kinds of, I would say, tactics or methods,
Sure.
um, to integrate into, and these like baby steps, because we're doing it in our department too, with like comp plans and like ag plans and housing stuff of just like, well, why don't you start at this place instead? And when you're thinking about engagement, why don't you ask these questions instead? Like, so it is kind of like, starting from a different place.
Yeah, okay. That makes a lot more sense. And yeah, rather than bringing in
Cool.
like a separate process into the existing process, just adapting within our own staff.
Cool. Um, I know that we're over time. Are there any more questions? If we do have the application up, it's on our website. The deadline is on Monday, July 6th, until the end of day. So if you have questions, my email's in the chat. Thank you, Max. And yeah, unless there are any other thoughts, final thoughts or questions. Ooh, yeah. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rashni.
Yeah, take it easy. Enjoy your
Thanks.
vacation.